Well, welcome back to In the Word. We're in Isaiah chapter 10 today. Isaiah chapter 10 is one of those chapters where the chapter break is kind of awkward and it breaks the flow of our discussion because we've been talking about the coming Assyrian invasion of northern Israel. So Isaiah, remember, is a prophet to Judah and Jerusalem, but he's warning of this coming attack by Assyria, the exile in the northern kingdom, and it's a warning to Judah and Jerusalem. There's parallels here as well. Micah chapter 1 and Isaiah chapter 10 are really talking about the same Assyrian invasion, but they're looking at it from different perspectives. So in Micah chapter 1, we see the Assyrian army attacking the northern kingdom through the lowlands, whereas where Isaiah verses 1 through 4 of chapter 10 is observing the very same thing happening, but they're coming over the northern ridges and they're coming down ultimately into Jerusalem. We could divide this chapter then into several pieces. Verses 1 through 5 are talking about the Assyrian invasion of the northern kingdom. So that's where it begins. And you'll see that very explicit reprimand there to the leaders of Israel. So the leaders of Israel are singled out. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, and the writers who keep writing oppression, to turn aside the needy from justice and to rob the poor of my people of their right. So he's reminding the northern kingdom of why this judgment is being brought on them, and particularly the leaders. We've seen this throughout our reading of the Bible, as the leaders, so the nation. When we get to verses 5 through 19 of chapter 10, and we see something interesting here, that after Assyria does its work of bringing judgment on the northern kingdom, then God is going to in turn judge the Assyrians. So he's going to judge them for their pride and hypocrisy, their arrogance, their boastfulness. As you go through this section in your reading today, you might want to take note of that. Interesting verse here, verse 7 in this section. He, that is Assyria, does not so intend, and his heart does not so think. That is, he's just a tool in God's hands. He doesn't intend that. He doesn't think that. His heart is set to destroy and to cut off the nations, not a few of them. What we see here from a theological perspective is the interaction between God's sovereignty and man's will. On the one hand, Assyria is following the evil desires of their hearts. This section is going to describe again their pride, their arrogance, their boastfulness, their rapaciousness in destroying the northern kingdom, a very violent people. And as far as they're concerned, from their perspective, they're doing exactly what they want to do. Their hearts full of pride are driven to wanton destruction. But at the same time, God is using them to destroy or to bring chastisement on that northern kingdom. That they are but a tool in God's hands, and God is being used by them. And then God will turn around and judge them rightly for the hatred and the boastfulness and arrogance in their hearts. So we see this, on the one hand, man's free will, if you would, pursuing a fallen course of action. And at the same time, God using that. But then God turns around and justly judges them for what they've done freely. So we see this interaction. When we talk about God's sovereignty, sometimes people misunderstand that to be almost as if God is treating us like robots, or God is treating mankind as if they don't have any volition. Well, what we find through the Bible is that man has the volition to do what fallen man wants to do. They can't do good, but they can do evil. And being evil, they do evil, and God judges them, so they are perfectly responsible and perfectly culpable, while God uses them sovereignly. So we see this interaction. I'll point it out as we go through the rest of our reading. This is a common feature, and again, I think sometimes for those of us who understand God to be absolutely sovereign, our view is mischaracterized that people have no volition of their own, but they do. They can do just what they want, all the evil that they want, and they'll be held accountable for it. So again, in verses 5 through 19, we see God destroying his promise to destroy the oppressors of his people. And then in verses 20 to 23, God assures the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom that a remnant of people will be spared from judgment. You know, it's interesting when we read God's judgment throughout the Bible. In Genesis, we see him sparing or agreeing to spare Sodom and Gomorrah from destruction if there's as few as 10 people that are righteous in the city. Of course, he couldn't find 10 people, and he ended up destroying it. What is the number that God will restrain his hand? Don't really know. The Bible doesn't tell us that. We do know that on the basis of repentance, as happened in Nineveh in the book of Jonah, for example, God will wait and delay judgment, a judgment that ultimately came upon them, and that was Nahum's prophecy of their judgment. But here we see that God will not spare the northern kingdom. Ultimately, he's not going to spare the southern kingdom. But in verses 20 to 23, we see that God will save a remnant. And in this case, several thousand. But this was several thousand out of an innumerable number of people in the nation. So a promise for those who remain faithful, that God will see them and take note of them, and they will return. Verses 24 through 34 then go back to the immediate situation. Previous verses were for a longer term period of time, but now we turn back to 24 through 34. And the immediate situation of this Assyrian army coming down from the north like a flood. And that flood is really going to roll up against Jerusalem. The invasion is going to come down from what became known as Samaria, the northern kingdom, down to the very holy city of Jerusalem. And Micah, in his prophecy, traces this the same distance. So it's going to come right up against the walls of Jerusalem, but then be stopped. And God is providing them with this prophecy, which we're going to see actually fulfilled in the pages of Isaiah. Why does God do this? Well, number one, he's doing this for Judah and Jerusalem to give them confidence, to give them trust in him. We're going to see ultimately that they don't, and God brings judgment on them. Why does God do this for us? Why is this recorded in the book of Isaiah? In order to show us that God is faithful, that God will carry out his covenant. He will do what he said he will do. And we can be certain, we can be confident in him as well, and live in confidence. Now, of course, we're past the destruction of Jerusalem, and we're looking forward to the return of the Lord, a promise through the prophets that we are to honor, we are to keep, and we are to live in light of his coming. So that's chapter 10 today, brothers and sisters. Very interesting. I really love the major prophets, love the interaction between theology and history that we see in the prophets. And Again, I think as we go through this, we can see the application for ourselves, the necessity for us to be faithful and believe the words of God, believe his promises, and live in light of those promises and their soon fulfillment. So God bless you. Have a great weekend. If you need the reading plan, perhaps you've lost it, you can go back to my blog and you can download it from there, or else I'll put a link down in the bottom in the information section of this particular post, and you'll be able to get the reading plan. And stick with us as we go through the major prophets in the coming year. God bless you.